Alright, so my review for Spider-Man 2. Welcome. I hate this movie. I mean, the comedy isn't funny, the villain isn't done well, the action sucks, and I don't care one shit about Peter's problems. Said nobody ever. You know why? Because this movie is really fucking good. But before I get into my thoughts on Spider-Man 2, I have a couple of questions. How are Mary Jane and Harry so chill with each other after every awkward thing that happened by the end of the last movie? Does Aunt May know that Peter is Spider-Man? And what the hell is with all the strange references? I mean, Peter references Bleecker Street and this one guy references Doctor Strange directly. Alright, so now that I've got those questions out of the way, let's move on to my thoughts on the movie. Speaking of the comedy doesn't work all the time with me. The one scene that I've never liked in this movie, even in the extended version of this movie, it just never works no matter what they do with it. It will never work for me. It's that scene in the elevator, that awkward scene in the elevator with that one guy that kind of looked like Andrew Garfield or Jeremy Johns, one of those two. I don't know, it just didn't work for me, but most of the comedy does work. For example, the scene where Aunt May kicks that banker in the shin. It's almost like she wasn't meant to kick him. Like, if you've seen the scene and you understand the context of the scene, she should have been kicking Peter in the shin. She ends up kicking the banker in the shin, and he walks away like, "Tired of this shit happening, I quit!" Alright, so one thing that I've always known about this movie is that the action in this movie is so fucking good, especially for the time that it came out, right? Around this time, we had the X-Men movies, another great superhero franchise, but back then, their action scenes were kind of shit. And I'm not the only one. I know people out there think that. And I mean, have a look at this. Like, this is fucking ridiculous. I mean, the movies might be alright, but compared to these Spider-Man movies, the action in here is just so much better. Doc Ock in this movie is awesome. A great opponent for Spider-Man, especially with that awesome introduction in the hospital scene where he's fucking murdering everybody. Yeah. Okay, moving on. Seriously though, Doc Ock is done pretty well in this movie, and I initially didn't have this opinion where I thought he was done really well. I thought, for me personally, initially, that he wasn't relatable. They didn't set him up well, they didn't explore his motivation too well, and I was just sitting there thinking, why am I having such a hard time deciding whether or not I like Doc Ock in this movie? I wonder if it's the game. I honestly think that's what it was, though. I think I've come off a high off of the PS4 game and just loved that Doc Ock, that this one kind of pales in comparison. But still, after fucking trying to come up with something clever to say, I realized, you know what, he is actually done pretty well, okay? He's done well, alright? They set him up as a good human character, someone with a dream, someone who has people he cares about, and then in one instance, he loses them all, okay? So in that respect, they did do him well, because I know there are two scenes that sort of delve into his motivations loosely, okay? It's the first scene is where he's standing on something and he's reflecting on his wife's death and the loss of his dream, right? And then there's a second scene near the end of the movie where he's talking to Peter, and Peter basically says, sometimes you have to put your dreams away to do what's right. Basically, I'm paraphrasing. So from those two scenes, you can understand that, you know, this is something that he is taking quite seriously. This is his lifelong dream. But for me personally, I think there could have been a second scene in between those two main scenes where Peter himself gets to understand why he wants to do this. I mean, by the end of the movie, Peter already understands why he wants to do this. That's why he gives him that motivational speech about letting go of your dreams and doing what's right, yeah? I think, though, there could have been a second scene in between those two scenes that I just mentioned where Doc Ock just opens up to him and says, you know what, I've got nothing left. This is why I want to do this, because I've got nothing left, my wife is fucking dead, these guys won't shut up, right? These things on my back, so what am I going to do? Anyway, speaking of Peter Parker, he's the best part of this movie, without a doubt. I mean, we all know this. So many people have said this. This is what makes this movie great. Peter Parker, the way this movie explores Peter Parker shows us his life. He is just a normal guy with everyday first world problems like us, right? That's what makes Peter Parker great, and that's one of the two aspects of Peter Parker that this movie explores so well. I mean, the movie starts off with him losing his job and struggling to pay rent and living in this shitty apartment that no one would live in. Another very important aspect that this movie also explores about Peter Parker is that he's always kind of forced into a corner and having to choose between two choices, right? That is the best part of Spider-Man Peter Parker, right? And it's such a pivotal part of Spider-Man that so many stories have done that. Like I mentioned, Spectacular Spider-Man, the game, right, Homecoming, he's always making a choice, right, between his personal life and his superhero life. And they could do that as many times as they fucking want to, and I just be like, oh, I love it, it's so good, man. And this movie, imagine the scene on the bridge in the first movie, right? But this whole movie is exactly like that, right? This whole movie is that. Imagine the scene in the game where Peter has to make a choice between saving Aunt May or the rest of the city with the virus, right? The cure for the virus, right? Imagine that, but this whole movie. Imagine in Spectacular Spider-Man when Peter has to decide between taking a cure and not being Spider-Man anymore and having a normal life, right? Or not taking the cure and continuing to be Spider-Man. Imagine that, but a whole movie worth. I just can't explain it enough. Like, it is so compelling and intriguing and interesting. It just sucks me into a game, animated show, movie, whatever form of media that Spider-Man is in. If they're gonna do that, you've got me. And there's so many other things that I didn't mention, like the tension between Harry and Peter, and that great scene between Peter and Aunt May where he reveals who was actually responsible that night for Uncle Ben's death. Anyway, I think I've talked enough about Spider-Man 2. I fucking love this movie. Was there any doubt to that? Anyway, I will see you in my review for Spider-Man 3. Fucking hell. I'll see you in that review.